3 hours before midnight on Christmas Eve, 4 men with Eastern coats and paid killers' patience were closing in on the cabin in the dark. Inside, a woman who had crossed 2,000 miles to marry a stranger picked up a Colt revolver, and the man who had not spoken to a woman in 15 years climbed the loft ladder with a Henry rifle and the certainty that he would either save her tonight or die trying. This is how she came to him, and this is what he became. The stagecoach door swung open with a dry creak that carried no welcome. Adelaide Thornbury stepped down into a silence so deep it pressed against her ears like cold water. The first snow of the season was falling in fat, slow flakes that settled on the shoulders of her crimson traveling dress, on the brim of her bonnet, on the lashes. She could not stop blinking. Her boots, the same boots that had carried her across 8 states and through the smoke of 3 locomotive stations, sank into a thin crust of frost. She heard the driver behind her grunt as he wrestled her single carpet bag down from the rack. She did not turn. She could not turn, because in front of her, set against a wall of bitterroot pine and a sky the color of pewter, stood a cabin that looked as if no woman had crossed its threshold in a long, long time. The cabin was tall and wide-shouldered, hewn from logs the size of a man's body, dovetailed at the corners with the kind of patience that only loneliness teaches. Smoke rose from the chimney in a single thin ribbon. A pair of split firewood stumps stood beside the porch axe, sunk deep into the larger one blade, still humming faintly from a recent strike. Beyond the cabin, she could see the curve of a barn, the dark shapes of cattle in a far paddock, and behind everything, rising like the spine of some great sleeping animal, the white peaks of the Bitterroot Range. The mountains did not look at her. The mountains did not care. Adelaide pressed her gloved hand against her chest, where the letter lay folded inside her bodice against her heart. She had read it so many times across 8 days of travel that the paper had grown soft as cloth. She had memorized every careful slanted word. I am not a wealthy man, but I have a parcel of land, a herd of good cattle, and a roof that does not leak. I cannot promise you love at the start, but I promise you respect, protection, and that I will never raise my hand against you. A Hartwick man keeps his word. That is what my father taught me. Silas Wendell Hartwick. The name had felt like a key in her hand, a door waiting somewhere west, somewhere she could finally rest. The letter had promised her a husband. The letter had not said he had buried his first wife under that pine tree at the edge of the yard. The letter had not said he had not spoken to a single woman in 15 years. And the letter most certainly had not said that when he stepped out of the barn with a Henry rifle held loose in his hand and his eyes on her like she was a ghost climbing up out of his grave, he would not know her name. The barn door had opened. He stood in the gap framed by darkness, behind him dust motes catching the dying afternoon light around his shoulders. He was tall, taller than she had imagined, 6'4", and built the way a tree is built, all heartwood and weathered bark. His shirt was the color of a winter creek sleeves rolled to the elbow despite the snow, and the rifle in his hand was not pointed at her, only carried the way a man carries a tool he has known since boyhood. Storm gray eyes, a scar through his left eyebrow that some old animal had given him, a jaw that had not smiled in long enough that the muscles had forgotten how. He looked at her. He looked at the stagecoach. He looked at the driver, who was already climbing back up onto his seat with the haste of a man who knew when not to linger. He looked at her again. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and rough, the voice of a man who used it only when he had to. "I think you've come to the wrong place." Why, Adelaide tried to speak and found her tongue would not move. Her legs, which had borne her across so many miles, chose this moment to remember how tired they were. She felt the world tilt. She felt the snow lift toward her, and then she felt a pair of arms catch her before the ground could. He smelled of pine smoke and saddle leather and something colder, something that lived under skin. She was so light in his hands that he seemed almost startled by her. She heard the rifle clatter to the porch boards. She heard the driver call out something she could not parse. She heard her own voice, faint as a moth's wing, say into the dark wool of his shoulder, "I am your bride. I have come 2,000 miles to be your wife." And then the dark closed over her like a slow black river. This story takes place high in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana Territory in the autumn of 1884. Before we go on, partner, if you find yourself drawn into the story tonight, take a moment to subscribe. New Frontier Tales come every week, and each one carries a man and a woman who learn the hard way what love costs and what it gives back. And down in the comments, tell me where you are listening from. I read every one. Now let us return to Adelaide Thornberry and to a cabin at the edge of the world. She woke to the smell of coffee and the heavy warmth of a buffalo robe spread across her body. For a long moment she did not know where she was. The ceiling above her was rough-hewn timber, the beams blackened with decades of wood smoke. A kerosene lamp burned low on a table beside her. The window showed an early dark blue and deep with snow still falling beyond the glass. She was not in Chicago. She was not in St. Louis. She was not on a train. She was on a sofa in a parlor she did not know, and somewhere nearby a man was speaking in a low voice to another man, and the quiet rumble of their words was the first sound she had heard in days that did not come from steel wheels and steam. She turned her head. The motion sent a slow ache down through her shoulders. Two men stood by the great stone fireplace at the far end of the room. The taller was the man from the barn, the one who had caught her. He stood with his shoulders set, one hand on the mantel, head bent. The other man was younger, slighter only by comparison, his hair a shade lighter, his face open where the older one's was closed. He was holding a leather-bound book against his chest, finger marking a page as if he had been reading and only just looked up. His eyes were the warm amber of a held lantern. The younger one saw her first. His whole body softened. "Silas," he said, "she's come back to us." The older man turned. The lamplight moved across his face, and Adelaide saw it again, that look that was not anger and was not pity, that look of a man who had walked out into a graveyard one morning and found one more stone than he remembered. He came to the side of the sofa and crouched down slow, the way a man approaches an injured deer. He did not touch her. He did not lean too close. He simply looked at her, and at last he said, "Ma'am, my name is Silas Hartwick. This is my brother Ezra. You are at Silver Ridge Ranch in Montana Territory, 40 miles west of the town of Redemption. You came in by stagecoach about 2 hours ago. Do you remember?" She remembered. She remembered all of it. "My name," she said, and her voice was small but steady, "is Adelaide Thornberry. People who love me call me Della. I came here to be your wife." She lifted her hand from beneath the robe. Folded inside it, soft as worn flannel, was the letter. "You wrote this to me in June." He took the letter from her without a word. He stood, walked back to the lamp, and unfolded it. She watched his face. She watched the way the muscles along his jaw began to work slow at first, then harder until the bones stood out beneath the skin. "Brother," he said, and his voice had gone flat as river ice. "Come here." Ezra came. He read the letter over Silas's shoulder. His face changed in stages: surprise, then sorrow, then a kind of soft, sad understanding, as if he were remembering something he had once tried to forget. "It is Pa's hand," Ezra said quietly. "Yes," said Silas. "He signed your name." "Yes." The two brothers stood there in the lamplight, and for a moment Adelaide felt that she had walked into a moment that did not belong to her, a moment with the weight of years on it, and she had to look away. She turned her face toward the fire instead and watched the flames work through a knot in a piece of pine until it cracked open. When Silas spoke again, he had crossed back to her. He sat in a chair drawn up beside the sofa. He set the letter on the small table between them, smoothing it once with the flat of his palm, the way a man straightens a Bible at the start of a hard prayer. "Mrs. Thornberry," he said, "I owe you the truth, and I will give it to you plain. I did not write that letter. The hand is my father's. His name was Obadiah Hartwick. He died 2 months ago of a sickness in his lungs that took him slow. Before he died, it appears he sent for you. He used my name because I am the eldest. He told no one." Adelaide closed her eyes. She felt the cold of the snow outside come up into her chest, even through the buffalo robe. "I have come," she said, and she could hear the careful way she was holding her own voice together to a dead man. "You have come," said Silas, "to a household of dead men's promises, and I am sorry for it. Tomorrow when the sun is up and the trail has cleared, I will harness the team and I will drive you down to redemption. I will buy you a ticket back to Chicago. I will give you what money I have, which is some, to set you on your feet again. That is what I owe you for what my father did in his grief." She opened her eyes. She looked up at him, and in that moment, Silas Hartwick saw something he had not seen in any face for 15 years. He saw a woman make a decision. "Mr. Hartwick," she said, "I cannot go back to Chicago." "Ma'am, the cost of the ticket is not a difficulty." "It is not the cost." Her hand went without thinking to her bodice, where another piece of paper lived. She did not draw it out. "Not yet. I have burned every bridge behind me. If I return to Chicago, I will not survive the year. I will spare you the particulars now. I will only ask, please, that you let me stay until morning, and that we speak again when I am stronger." Ezra was looking at his brother. Adelaide saw the look. It was the look of a younger brother who has already decided and is waiting only to see whether the older one will arrive at the same place by his own road. Silas's jaw worked. He looked at the letter on the table. He looked at the dark window. He looked at the chair across from him, an empty chair pulled close to the fire, the kind of chair that had once held someone and now simply held the memory of her. "You will sleep tonight in the back bedroom," he said. "There are clean linens in the chest at the foot of the bed. Ezra will carry your bag. We will speak again at first light. A Hartwick man keeps his word, Mrs. Thornberry, and my word to you tonight is that you are safe under this roof. Nothing more and nothing less. Imhai see." He stood. He did not look at her again as he walked out into the dark hallway. She heard the back door open and close. She heard a moment later the clean, sharp ring of an axe biting into wood. He was splitting kindling in the snow at full dark. She understood in that moment that Silas Hartwick split wood the way other men prayed. Ezra knelt beside the sofa. He had set the book aside, and his hands were folded in front of him, the way a man folds his hands when he is choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Thornberry," he said, "my brother has not been a soft man for a long time. He was once. He will speak to you stern and short, but he is not unkind. What our father did sending for you was a thing he did because his heart was breaking for us, both of us. I do not know your story yet, but I know my father, and I know that he did not pick your name out of a hat. He read your letter to the agency. He read it more than once. I would find it on the kitchen table in the mornings with his spectacles laid across it. Whatever you wrote to that agency, he believed it. And so do I. Welcome to Silver Ridge." She felt her eyes fill. She did not let the tears go. She had not let tears go in front of any man since the night Nathaniel was carried out of the print shop on a plank, and she would not start now. "Mr. Hartwick," she whispered. "Ezra," he said, and he gave her the first smile she had seen since stepping down from the stagecoach. It was a small one, the kind that knew about sorrow. If we are going to share a roof even for a night, then we may as well share our names. The bedroom Ezra showed her to that night was at the back of the cabin, off a short hall lined with cedar plank. He carried her carpet bag and set it inside the door. He lit the lamp on the small writing desk. He did not enter further. He bowed his head and said, "Sleep, Della Thornberry. The night is colder than it looks." And then he closed the door soft, and his footsteps moved away. She was alone. The room was small and clean and very still. A narrow iron bed stood under the single window, a washstand with a chipped blue pitcher, a chest of drawers with a small oval mirror tilted on top, a rocking chair in the corner, the runners worn smooth by years of patient use, two dresses still hung on pegs, along one wall, gray wool and soft brown calico. And although the air in the room smelled of cedar and lavender water from a sachet long forgotten in the chest, Adelaide knew at once that this room had not been opened in a great while. The dust on the writing desk had been wiped only that day hurriedly, and the corners still held faint webs. This had been a wife's room. This had been Cordelia Hartwick's room. Adelaide set down her bag. She took off her bonnet and laid it on the chair. She walked to the small framed photograph beside the mirror and saw in faded silver tones a young Silas no more than 17 standing beside a girl in a high-collared dress. He was smiling. It was a smile so unguarded that for a moment Adelaide did not recognize him. The girl beside him was tall and dark-eyed, her hand resting on his arm, with the unself-conscious ease of a woman who had never doubted her place at his side. Cordelia Hartwick, Cordelia of the gentle face, Cordelia who had been buried under that pine tree 15 years ago. Adelaide set the photograph back exactly where it had been. She did not let her finger linger on the glass. She unfastened the brooch at her throat and laid it on the desk. She unbuttoned the long sleeves at her wrists, and then, because she could not bear another moment of the weight of it, she reached into the bodice of her dress and drew out the second paper she had been carrying since Chicago. It was a torn page from the Chicago Tribune, dated 3 weeks prior. The corners were soft from her fingers. The headline at the top was small but clear. $500 reward. Fugitive thief. Adelaide Thornberry, widow. Age 24. Honey blonde hair. Blue eyes, last seen boarding. Westbound train at Union Station. Parties with information contact. Mr. Thaddeus Ashford Pemberton, Esquire of Chicago. She held the paper to the lamp and read his name, and the room around her went very small. $500 was more money than most working men in the territory saw in a year. He had not simply followed her. He had bought every man in the country with eyes and a willingness to use them. She folded the paper carefully and slid it back inside her bodice. She did not undress. She did not turn down the bed. She sat in the rocking chair in the dark, and she watched the snow fall outside the window, and she did not move until she heard, far away through the walls, the sound of an axe at last go quiet. In the front of the cabin, the brothers sat by the dying fire. Silas had a clay pipe between his teeth that he had not yet lit. The letter from their father lay open on the table between them. Ezra had set down David Copperfield and was watching the flames. "You are not putting her on a stage tomorrow," Ezra said. "I told her I would." "You told her so she could sleep. You did not mean it." Silas did not answer. He took the pipe out of his mouth and turned it slowly in his hand. "There was a man in Redemption last week," Ezra said. "Came in on the late stage from the east. Mr. Burnside saw him at the trading post, asking after a yellow-haired woman. Said she had taken something of his. Said he was offering $500. He did not give a name, but he wore an Eastern coat and he had 2 men with him who did not look like trading post men. Mr. Burnside thought he should mention it to me when he came by for the salt block. I did not know why at the time. Silas was very still. You knew when she stepped down from the stage. I suspected, I know now, she did not come up here for a husband she had never met because she was hopeful. She came up here because she was running. The fire popped. A piece of pine split open and a small blue flame crawled up out of the wound. Pa wrote the letter, Silas said at last. Pa is in the ground. We do not owe her a thing. We owe her what we owe any soul that comes to our door in the snow. Ezra looked across at his brother. And you know it. You have known it since you caught her on the porch. Silas set the pipe down. He stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark. I am not the man Pa thought I still was, he said. You are exactly the man Pa thought you still were, Ezra said. That is the thing about our father. He always saw a little farther than the rest of us. Silas did not answer. After a long moment, he said very quietly, She has the same look Cordelia had. The night I asked her to marry me, the night before the sickness came, that same look, like she was already deciding to be brave about something she had not told me yet. I know, said Ezra. I do not want that look in this house again, Ezra. I do not have it in me to bury another one. Then do not bury her, Ezra said. Keep her alive. The fire spoke once more between them, and neither one of them found anything to say after that. The morning came pale and clear. The storm had passed in the night, leaving 6 inches of new snow on the yard and a sky the color of washed linen. Adelaide woke in the rocking chair, stiff in every joint, and for a moment she did not understand why she was not on a train. Then she remembered. She rose. She washed her face at the basin. She put up her hair as well as she could, without help, in a soft Victorian knot at the back of her head, and she pinched her cheeks for color and went out into the kitchen. Silas was already there. He stood at the iron stove in his shirt sleeves rolled, pouring coffee from a battered tin pot into 2 enamel cups. He turned when she came in. For a moment, just a moment, his eyes went to her hair and to the careful way she had pinned it, and something behind his face moved quick as a trout in shadow and was hidden again. Mrs. Thornberry, he said. Della, she said. If you please. The other name was given to me by a man who is not here anymore. He nodded once. He set down the coffee pot. He set both cups on the table. Sit down, he said. We have things to talk about. She sat. She wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth of it went into her fingers slowly, like sunlight thawing a window. I have been thinking, he said. He did not sit. He stood across the table from her, hands flat on the back of a chair, and his eyes did not leave her face. It has come to my attention by way of my brother that there may be a man in redemption who has business with you, a man from the East, a man with money and with men. Is this so? She felt the blood drop out of her face. She did not deny it. She would not lie to this man, not at his own table. Yes, she said. His name is Thaddeus Ashford Pemberton. He was the landlord of the boarding house where I worked after my husband died. He has been pursuing me against my will for nearly 2 years. When I refused him, he accused me of stealing $200 from the lady I worked for. He printed handbills. He hired men. He has offered $500 for word of where I am. Silas's knuckles whitened on the back of the chair. I did not steal the money, she said. Mrs. Quincy gave it to me from her own savings. She gave it to me so I could run. She is 65 years old, and she put it into my hand, and she said, Adelaide, get out of this city before he ruins you. I took it because if I had not taken it, I would not be sitting here now. And the husband, Silas said, the one whose name you set down. Her throat closed. She had to look away from him. Nathaniel Thornberry, she said. He was a printer, a Union man. He took a wound at Gettysburg, that never quite healed. We were married 14 months when the great press at the shop where he worked came down off its bracket and crushed his chest. He died in my arms before the doctor could get there. We were married, Mr. Hartwick, but my husband was a sick man for most of those 14 months. We never had the chance to be husband and wife in the full meaning of the word. I tell you this because I will not have you discover it later and think I came here under any false flag. I came as a widow. I came also as a girl who has not been a wife in the way most wives have been wives. She lifted her eyes. She made herself look at him as she said it. He did not look away. He held her gaze for what felt like a long time, and whatever was working behind his face was not what she had braced for. There was no flicker of judgment. There was only a kind of slow, surprised tenderness, as if he had reached for a stone and found a bird's egg in his hand. "Mrs. Thorne," he began and corrected himself. "Della, I thank you for telling me. It does not change my mind on what I am about to say." He sat down at last. He set his hands on the table, palms down, the calluses on them dark with the work of years. "I will not put you on a stage today," he said. "The man you describe will be watching every stage that comes down out of these mountains. Putting you on one would be the same as handing you to him, so you will not be going to redemption tomorrow, not while he is there." She did not breathe. "There are 2 bedrooms in this cabin," he said. "You will keep the one you slept in last night. My brother and I will share the one across the hall as we did when we were boys. You will not be alone in any room with either of us with the door shut except the room you sleep in, and that door you will hold the key to. You will eat at this table. You will keep this house if you have a mind to. We will hunt and we will keep the herd. You will not be asked to be a wife to any man under this roof, not by act, not by word, not by look, not by me." He paused. He swallowed. "You will stay until the spring," he said. "By that time I will have a better notion of what to do about the man in redemption. You may stay longer if you wish. You may leave with my blessing and a stake when the trails are clear and your enemy is no longer at the bottom of the pass. You will not be bought. You will not be sold. You will not be hidden. You will be a guest in a house that has not had a guest in 15 years, and you will be safe. That is my word to you. A Hartwick man keeps his word." Tears came up into her eyes for the second time in less than a day, and this time she did not have the strength to hold them. She let one fall. "Mr. Hartwick," she said. "Silas," he said quietly. "If you please." "Silas," she said. "Why?" He looked down at his hands. He looked up. "Because my father wrote you a letter," he said, "and a Hartwick man keeps his word, even when the word was set down by the Hartwick who is in the ground." That afternoon Ezra walked her over the place. He showed her the cabin first room by room, the kitchen with its black buck's cast iron stove and the rope of dried venison hanging from the ceiling beam, and the pine plank floor scrubbed pale at the doorway from years of boots, the parlor with the great fireplace built of mountain stone, each rock chosen by hand, set in mortar by a man who had taken 2 summers to do it, the pantry with its sacks of flour and cornmeal and dried beans, its shelves of preserves and glass jars, the whole room cool and faintly sweet, the trapdoor in the kitchen floor that opened on a root cellar deep enough for a man to stand in, where smoked hams hung from iron hooks and crocks of butter sat on shelves cut into the cold earth. He took her out then, and the snow squeaked under their boots. He showed her the barn suite, with hay and the warm breath of horses. 6 work horses for the team and the plow, 2 saddle horses, a bay gelding for Ezra, and a slate-gray mare for Silas. The mare came to the rail and pushed her great soft nose into Adelaide's gloved hand, and Ezra said, "Her name is Whisper. She does not come to many. You should mark that." The cattle paddock beyond the barn held 40 head of red Hereford brought down off the high summer pasture only the week before, the smithy where Silas pounded his own horseshoes, and the woodshop where the brothers built their own furniture in the long winter evenings, the well 18 feet deep, sweet snow-melt water all year. 40 miles to Redemption, Ezra said. 12 to Mr. Burnside, our nearest neighbor. Past him is nothing for 30 more miles. You will see no road from this porch that leads anywhere a wagon can travel in winter. The mountain in winter is a country with one law. Stay alive, stay warm, stay together. That is the law. It is a hard country, Della said, looking out across the white pasture toward the rising peaks. It is the only country we know, said Ezra, and it is in its way a kind country. It does not lie. The mountain does not lie. You always know what it is going to do to you. It is the cities that lie. She thought of Chicago. She thought of gaslit hallways and gentlemen's smiles and the soft, soft footsteps in a corridor at midnight that meant a door was being tried. She thought of Thaddeus. Yes, she said, the cities lie. That evening she made supper. It was the first meal she had cooked in another woman's kitchen, and she was careful with everything. She found the venison and a sack of potatoes and an onion still firm in the cellar, and she made a stew the way Mrs. Quincy had taught her, with sage from the dry bunch hanging beside the stove and a splash of dark beer from a stoneware jug on the pantry shelf. She baked a pan of biscuits. She set the table for 3. She found a pewter candlestick on the mantel that had not been used in a long time, and she polished it with a corner of her apron and set a candle in it, and she lit the candle just as the brothers came stamping in from the barn. Silas stopped in the kitchen doorway. He did not say anything. He looked at the table. Ezra took off his hat. "Brother," he said very gently, "I think we are about to have supper." They sat. Silas said the blessing. His voice did not waver, but Della heard it catch once on the words, "Give us this day." They ate. The stew was good. The biscuits were better. Ezra had 2 helpings of each. When the plates were nearly empty, Silas set down his spoon. He looked at Della across the candle flame. "Mrs. Hartwick," he began and stopped, and his face changed, and he tried again. "Della, that is the first cooked supper at this table since the autumn of 1869. He said it the way a man says a thing he has been carrying for 15 years and only just realized he no longer has to carry alone. Ezra cleared his throat and looked at his plate. Della did not know what to say, so she said the only thing she could. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me cook it." Silas nodded once. He picked up his spoon. He kept eating, but his hand, as he reached for his coffee cup, was not entirely steady, and Della looked away to spare him because she understood. She had buried a husband. She knew what an empty chair could do to a man at supper. Outside, the wind began to rise. Across the next 6 days, the weather turned. The snow that had welcomed her was followed by a second fall and then a third, and by the end of the week, the trail down to Redemption was closed in earnest, the drifts in the high pass shoulder deep on a horse. Della had thought she would feel trapped. She did not. She felt instead the strangest quiet she had ever known, a quiet that did not press on her, but held her the way a deep snowfield holds the morning sound of a single bird. She learned. Ezra showed her how to milk the goat, a placid creature named Bessie, who kicked her into a pile of straw on the second morning and made Ezra laugh out loud, the first true laugh he had laughed in a long time. He showed her how to gather eggs from the henhouse without disturbing the broody hens. He showed her how to pump well water in the cold without freezing the handle. Silas, in his quieter way, taught her things too. He taught her to read the tracks in the snow at the edge of the timber, the stretched gait of a wolf, the dainty heart of a deer, the great blunt pad of a black bear who had not yet gone to den. He taught her the names of the peaks. He taught her how to load his Colt revolver, slow and careful, 6 chambers, never the 7th, and where to put it down at night, so a person who needed it could find it without knocking it loose. He did not touch her. He did not look at her too long. He did not allow himself anything. But she saw on the morning of the 4th day that he had set on the table beside her place a single late blooming sprig of bitterroot he had cut from somewhere on the south face of the property. It lay there beside her coffee cup, as if the wind had blown it in. Neither of them spoke of it, but she pressed it between 2 pages of Ezra's Lent book of Emily Dickinson that night, and she did not write down where she had pressed it because she did not need to. She told Ezra about Thaddeus sitting on the porch in the late afternoon with a wool blanket around her shoulders and the sun going down behind the timber line. She told him everything she had not told Silas, the midnight footsteps, the hand on her shoulder she could not shake off, the slow, patient cruelty of a man who knew that money would buy him time and that time would wear any woman down. She told him how she had broken the kerosene lamp over Thaddeus's head the night he came into her room without knocking, and how she had run down the back stairs with the $200 Mrs. Quincy had pressed into her hand a month earlier, and how she had slept in a church basement in Springfield for 2 nights before she had the courage to board the train west. Ezra listened. He did not interrupt. When she was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My brother will hear this, from you, not from me, but he will hear it, and when he does, that man will not put a finger on you again, not while there are 2 Hartwicks left on this mountain." She watched the sun go down behind the timber. "I have not asked God for anything in 8 months," she said. "I think I asked him for something tonight." "What did you ask?" said Ezra. "I asked him to let me deserve this kindness," she said. Ezra did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was very low. "You already do, Della. You already do." On the 7th night, the wind came hard out of the northwest, and the stovepipes sang with it, and the chickens sounded restless in their coop, and Della was at the stove turning a skillet of cornbread when the pounding came at the door. It was not the pounding of a friend. It was the pounding of a man who could barely stand. Silas was up before she could turn around, the Henry in his hand. He flung the door open with the rifle ready. The man on the porch was young, no more than 20, his face streaked with blood from a gash at his hairline, his coat torn at the shoulder. He took 1 step into the lamplight and almost went down. Ezra caught him under the arms and hauled him to the bench by the door. "Mr. Hartwick," the boy said, his teeth chattering. "Mr. Hartwick, sir. It is Mr. Burnside. Up at the place." He took a horn from the brindle bull. "Side stove in. Doc Whitlock cannot come. Storm in the pass. He sent me down. He says please." He coughed. He blinked at the ceiling. His eyes drifted past Silas and past Ezra and found Della at the kitchen doorway in her apron, the wooden spoon still in her hand. He swallowed. "Mr. Hartwick, sir," he said, and his voice changed. "There is one more thing. There was a man in Redemption yesterday, Eastern man, black coat, 2 riders with him. He was at the stage office asking after a yellow-haired woman come in on last week's stage. He had a bill out of the Tribune, $500 reward. Mr. Burnside told me to tell you. Mr. Burnside told me to tell you so you would know what is coming up the mountain after this storm clears." The cornbread skillet smoked. Della did not move. Silas turned his head slowly. He looked at her across the lamp-lit room. His face was not the face of a man who had just been told a stranger was hunting under his trees. It was the face of a man who had decided something a long time ago and was only now hearing the bell of it ring. "The mountain does not care," he said quietly, "but I do." He set the rifle down on the table, gentle as a sleeping child. He crossed the room and put his hand for the first time on Della's shoulder. "Get your coat," he said. "We have a neighbor to save, and then we have a man to wait for." Outside, the wind rose and the snow began to fall again, harder than before, and somewhere 40 miles down the mountain, in a cold hotel room in the town of Redemption, a man in a black Eastern coat sat by his lamplight with a torn page of the Chicago Tribune flat on the desk before him, and he ran one careful finger down the column of his own printed name, and he smiled. The ride to Walter Burnside's ranch took them 4 hours through snow that came down sideways. Silas led on, Whisper Ezra behind on the bay gelding, and the boy who had brought the news, whose name was Eli, slumped between them on a borrowed mule with a wool blanket strapped around him. Della had wanted to come. Silas had looked at her in the lamplight at the kitchen door, his hand still on her shoulder, and had said very quietly that she was needed at the cabin to keep the fires burning and the soup ready and the lamps lit in the windows, so a man, riding back through the dark, could find his way home. He had said the word home, and Della had felt it land somewhere low in her chest, and she had not argued. She had stood on the porch with the lantern lifted high until the 3 riders were swallowed up by the white dark, and then she had gone back inside and put another stick in the stove. They found Walter Burnside in his bed with 2 ribs driven in like staves and a fever already starting to climb. His face had gone the color of tallow. His housekeeper, a stout widow named Mrs. Hadley, had done what she could with hot cloths and turpentine, but her hands were shaking and her eyes were wet, and when Silas came through the door, she let out a sound that was almost a sob. "Thank Christ," she said. "Thank Christ, Mr. Hartwick. He has been asking for you." Silas pulled off his gloves with his teeth. He laid one bare hand on Walter Burnside's forehead and felt the heat. He laid the other hand against the side of the older man's neck and felt the pulse fast and shallow, like a bird trapped in a stovepipe. He nodded once to himself, the way a man does when he reads bad news in a letter and decides to keep reading anyway. "Ezra," he said, "boil water, all you can. Mrs. Hadley, I will need every clean cloth in this house. Eli, you sit down by the stove, and you do not stand up until I tell you to. You have given enough today." The boy sat. His head went down to his chest before he could even take off his coat. Silas worked through the night. Della would learn this later in pieces from Ezra and from Mrs. Hadley and from Walter himself when he was strong enough to tell it. Silas Hartwick was not a doctor. He had never claimed to be, but he had been a frontier brother and a frontier son for 32 years, and he had set bones and bound wounds and pulled calves out of failing cows since he was 12 years old. He bound Walter's chest with strips of muslin until the broken ribs sat where they were meant to sit. He pressed willow bark tea between the older man's lips until he swallowed. He sat by the bed and counted the breaths, 1 through 100, and back down again, a count he had learned at his own dying mother's bedside 15 years before, a count he had hoped never to need again. By dawn, the fever had broken. Walter Burnside opened his eyes and saw Silas in the chair beside him and said in the cracked whisper of a man who had walked to the edge and turned around, "Son, you came. You sent for me," Silas said. "A Hartwick man comes." Walter closed his eyes. A tear ran down into the white whiskers at his temple. "I have something to tell you, Silas, about your father, about the letter." Silas was very still. Outside the window, the storm was at last beginning to thin the sky, going pale at the eastern edge. "Tell me," he said. Walter Burnside drew a careful breath, mindful of the ribs. "Your father and me," he said, "we made that letter together at my kitchen table last June. He could not always hold the pen steady. By then the cough was that bad. I sat with him through the long evenings while he wrote. I fetched the ink. I steadied the lamp. I read back to him what he had set down so he could be sure of it. But he would not let me write a word of it in my own hand. He said the woman who answered should answer to his hand and no other. So every letter on that page your father set down himself, even when it took him an hour to finish a single line. I only kept him company while he did it. He swore me to silence. He said, Walter, my boys will want to bury me twice if they ever find out, but I cannot go to my grave knowing they will be alone on that mountain forever. He said, Walter, find me a kind woman with nothing left to lose. He said, Walter, write to the agency. So we wrote, and we waited. And in August, the answer came back. A young widow out of Chicago, 24 years old. Her letter was, your father said, the most honest letter he had ever read. He read it 3 times. The 3rd time he cried, and that was the only time I saw him cry that whole summer. He said, Walter, that one. That is the one. And then he died before the train could get her here. And I am ashamed to say, I did not have the courage to tell you. I let her arrive on your porch like a snowfall you had not been warned about. Forgive an old man, Silas. Forgive me. Silas said nothing for a long time. Beyond the window, a single jay called once. Then again the first sound of a morning that had outlasted the storm. Walter, Silas said at last, I do not have it in me to be angry at a sick man, and I do not have it in me to be angry at a dead one. My father did not pick that woman by chance. You did not deceive me. You loved my father, and you loved my brother, and you loved me, and you did what a friend does even when it costs the friend his own peace. You are forgiven. There is nothing to forgive. Walter wept quiet and without shame. Silas sat with him a while. Then he stood and walked out into the kitchen and stood at the window with his back to Ezra, who had been listening from the doorway, and Silas looked out at the new snow on the high pasture for a long, long time. Brother, Ezra said, yes, that woman has been alone in our house all night with the lamps burning. Yes, said Silas, she's going to be standing on that porch when we ride in. Yes, said Silas, what are we going to do? Silas turned from the window. The grief that had ridden his face for 15 years was not gone, but beside it for the first time sat something else, something that looked in the early light almost like resolve. We are going to go home, he said. They stayed 2 more days at Burnside's place until Walter could sit up and take broth, and Mrs. Hadley swore on her dead mother she did not need them another hour. They rode back into Silver Ridge late on the 2nd afternoon, and Della was on the porch with the lantern, and she did not run to them, but she put her hand to her mouth when she saw the 3 horses come up out of the timber, and Silas saw her hand at her mouth, and he did not look away. Walter Burnside, when he was strong enough to ride down, a week later, sat at the Hartwick supper table with a plate of Dela's biscuits and gravy in front of him, and told her the rest. He told her about her own letter to the agency, the letter Obadiah Hartwick had read 3 times and wept over. He told her that his old friend had chosen her in his last summer, the way a man chooses the last seedling he will ever plant. He told her that she had not come to Silver Ridge by accident, and she had not come by deception either. She had come because a dying man had wanted for his sons exactly her. Della cried into her napkin. She did not try to hide it. Silas reached across the table and laid his hand on top of hers, and he left it there for the count of 3, and then he took it away. But she had felt it, and he had let her feel it, and that in this house was a beginning. The weeks that followed taught Della the shape of a Montana winter. She learned the rhythm of dark mornings and white afternoons and long blue evenings around the fire. She learned to throw scratch to the chickens at first light, and to brush ice from Whisper's mane when the mare came in from the paddock, and to listen for the change in the wind that meant a storm was 8 hours out instead of 2. She learned the way Silas drank his coffee black, and the way Ezra took his with a pinch of brown sugar, and the difference between the silence of a Hartwick man who was thinking and the silence of a Hartwick man who was waiting for her to speak first. She and Ezra became in those weeks something like brother and sister. He taught her chess on a board with carved pieces. He had whittled himself knights with mismatched ears, a queen with a slightly crooked crown. She taught him Emily Dickinson, reading aloud to him on quiet evenings, and when she came to the line about hope being the thing with feathers, Ezra closed his eyes and listened the way a man listens to a hymn he has not heard since his mother sang it. He told her one night about Mary Sutton, the girl who had broken their engagement after the sickness took the Hartwick women, the girl who had said she could not raise children in the shadow of so many graves. He did not say it bitterly. He said it the way a man says a thing he has at last forgiven. With Silas, it was different. Silas did not speak of Cordelia. Silas did not speak of the years between. He spoke of the herd, the weather, the work. But Della began to notice, as a woman notices weather, the small attentions. The woodbox by her bedroom door always full, the bitterroot sprig that appeared a second time, then a third on her writing desk. The way he stood up when she came into a room every time, even after she begged him not to. The night she had a bad dream and cried out and woke to find no one had come, but in the morning her coffee was already poured and there was a fresh log on the parlor fire, and Silas, when she thanked him for the coffee, said only very quietly, "I heard you in the night. I did not come in, but I heard you." She understood. He was a man who would not take a step toward her without her say-so. He was waiting the way a careful man waits for her to be the one to choose. In the 3rd week of November, the cold turned hard. The thermometer on the porch dropped to 20 below at sunup and did not climb above 0 by noon. The brothers brought the cattle in close to the home pasture. They strung ropes between the cabin and the barn and the woodshed the way frontier men have always strung ropes when a blizzard is on the way, because a man can lose himself in a whiteout 20 feet from his own door. On the morning of the 3rd day of that cold, Della went out for an armload of firewood with the rope in her gloved hand and the wind tearing at her shawl, and somewhere between the woodshed and the cabin, her boot caught on a buried branch, and she went down hard into a drift that closed over her head like cold water. The rope was 3 feet from her hand. She could not see it. She could not see the cabin. She could not see anything but white, and the white was already in her mouth and in her eyes and in her lungs, and the cold was not painful anymore, which was the worst sign of all. She thought with the strange calm of a person who has stopped being able to be afraid that this was an absurd way for Adelaide Thornberry to die after Chicago and Thaddeus and the train and all of it, to die in an armload of firewood 20 feet from a warm stove. She heard her name, or she thought she heard her name. She could not tell anymore where the wind ended and her own thoughts began. A hand closed on her wrist. He dug her out with his bare hands. He did not stop to put on his gloves. He hauled her up out of the drift and threw her over his shoulder, the way a man throws a sack of grain, and he found the rope by feel, and he carried her along the rope back to the cabin, and kicked the door open, and laid her on the floor in front of the fire, and tore his own coat off and threw it across her, and he was shouting for Ezra, but Ezra had gone down to the barn for the morning milking, and there was no one in the house but the two of them. Silas Hartwick had been a frontiersman since boyhood. He knew what severe cold did to a body. He knew there was only one thing that would save her, and that thing was warmth, and the only warmth available was his own. So he did what a frontier man does when he has to. He stripped her of her frozen outer dress and her snow-caked boots down to the dry layer of her chemise, and he wrapped her in every dry blanket in the house, and then, because the blankets alone were not enough, he climbed into the wool of them with her, and he held her against his chest, and he kept her there, and he turned his face toward the wall, and he did not look, and he said over and over into her hair words she would not remember in any order. He said her name. He said, "Do not go." He said, "Stay with me." He said, "Please." He said into the warm dark of her hair, "Winter always ends, Della. Winter always ends." When Ezra came in from the barn an hour later, stamping snow off his boots and calling for his brother, he found Silas sitting up against the foot of the parlor sofa with Della asleep in his arms, wrapped to the chin in 3 quilts and a buffalo robe, and her color was back and she was breathing slow and even, and Silas Hartwick was looking down at her face with an expression on his own face that Ezra had not seen there since the autumn of 1869. Ezra stopped in the doorway. He took off his hat. He did not say anything. He went into the kitchen and put on a fresh pot of coffee, and he closed the door between the kitchen and the parlor very gently, and he did not open it again for a long time. When Della woke at last, she was on the sofa under the quilts, and Silas was sitting in the chair across from her with his coat back on and a cup of cold coffee in his hand that he had clearly forgotten to drink. The fire was high. The kitchen door was closed. She did not at first remember. Then she did. "Mr. Hartwick," she said. "Silas," he said very low. "Silas, you were going to die." He did not look up from the cup. "I did what a man does. I did not look. I did not. I held you because the cold was killing you, and there was no one else here. If I have given you offense, I will sleep in the barn tonight, and every night after, and you will not have to look at me again until spring." She looked at him a long time. She looked at the way his hand was shaking on the coffee cup. She looked at the way he would not lift his eyes. "Silas Hartwick," she said quietly, "you saved my life. Anyone would have done the same. There is no one else on this mountain. There is only you, and you saved my life." He set the cup down. He put his face in his hands for one moment, only one, and then he took his hands away. "Della," he said, "yes, I saved your life. I would do it again. I would do it 10 times. But you do not owe me a thing for it. Not one thing. Do you hear me? You do not owe me what people owe a man who has saved them. That is not why I did it. I did it because—" He stopped. He took a breath. "I did it because you are where you belong. You have been where you belong since the night you stepped off that stage. I have known it for 3 weeks. I have not had the right to say it. I am saying it now, and I am not asking anything of you for saying it. I am only telling you so that you will know." She did not speak. The fire cracked. Outside, the wind at last was beginning to die. "Silas," she said, "sit beside me, please." He did. He sat at the edge of the sofa. He did not touch her. She reached out from under the quilt. She laid her hand on the back of his hand. He did not move. She felt the small tremor go through him and then go still. "You are where I belong too," she said. It was by the count of his eldest brother, the first time Silas Hartwick had wept in 15 years, and Della Thornberry did not turn her face away from his weeping. She let him put his forehead down against her wrist, and she watched the firelight in his hair, and she said nothing, and that was the only thing she could have said that would have been right. Thanksgiving came late that year, on the 27th of November. Walter Burnside, well enough now to ride, if not to rope, brought Mrs. Hadley up to Silver Ridge on a borrowed sleigh, and Sheriff Bartholomew Stanton and his wife Lavinia came up from Redemption with a bag of oranges all the way from California, and a story about how they had paid $2 apiece for them. Della had been cooking for 2 days. There was a wild turkey Silas had brought down at 300 yards with one shot from the Henry. There was mashed potato with butter from the cellar, and creamed onions and cornbread, and a pie made from the last of the cellar apples. There was Ezra at the head of the table at Silas's insistence, and Silas at the foot, and Della on Silas's right, and the candle in the pewter candlestick burning a fresh wax taper because the old one had been used up. After supper, when Walter was telling the sheriff for the third time the story of the brindle bull, Silas drew Della aside in the kitchen. He took something out of his vest pocket. He held it out on his open palm. It was a thin gold band, very plain, very old. "This was my mother's," he said. "Pa kept it in his Bible. I do not know if you will ever wear it, Della. I do not ask you to, but Pa wrote that letter for you. I think he wanted you to have this. I think he would want you to have it whether or not you ever had a use for it. Will you take it, just to keep?" She took it. She closed her fingers around it. She felt the weight of it, far heavier than its size. "I will keep it, Silas," she said. "I will keep it safe." She did not put it on. He did not ask her to. They went back into the parlor, and the sheriff was telling now his fourth version of the brindle bull story, and Lavinia Stanton was laughing into her tea, and Walter Burnside was shaking his head, and Ezra was at the piano his mother had played, picking out a slow, careful version of Shenandoah, and Della stood in the kitchen doorway with her hand in her apron pocket, the small ring warm against her palm, and she thought, "This is what a home sounds like." I had forgotten what a home sounds like. That night, after the company had gone, after Walter and Mrs. Hadley had set out for home in the moonlight on the sleigh, after Sheriff Stanton and his wife had taken the spare bed in Ezra's room, and Ezra had cheerfully made himself a pallet in front of the fire, Della stayed up. She sat at the kitchen table with Silas and Ezra. She told them at last about Thaddeus, all of it, the midnight footsteps, the hand on her shoulder, the lamp she had broken over his head, the $200 Beatrice Quincy had pressed into her palm, and the words Beatrice had said, the torn page of the Tribune folded against her ribs. She drew the page out. She laid it flat on the table between them. Silas read it once. He read it twice. He pressed it gently against the table, the way a man handles a thing he has finally been allowed to see. Then he set it aside. He looked at her. "He is in redemption," he said. "He has been in redemption for at least 3 weeks. Walter heard him in the Trading Post. Eli's news was a week old when Eli brought it. Thaddeus Ashford Pemberton has been sitting in a hotel down the mountain, spending money and asking questions, and he will come up here. He will not wait through the winter. He has hired men. He has paper. He has the law on his side, or what passes for the law, when a man with money says the word." "Yes," she said. "Then we will not wait either." He turned to Ezra. "Brother," he said, "tomorrow you ride for redemption. You go to Reverend Augustus Holloway. You ask him to come up the mountain at his earliest convenience. You ask him to bring his book." Ezra's eyes went wide for one moment and then steadied. "His book," Ezra said. "His book." "Brother," Ezra glanced at Della. He glanced back at his brother. "You are sure of all of it?" "I am sure," said Silas, "of the only part that requires me to be sure. The rest of it I will let her decide." He turned back to Della. He did not reach for her hand. He folded his own hands in front of him on the table. "Della," he said, "you and I have a problem. The problem is that if Thaddeus Ashford Pemberton arrives at this gate with a sheriff's writ and a bill of accusation, the law of the territory will be on his side, because you came up this mountain as Adelaide Thornberry, widow of Chicago, with nothing to tie you to this place. There is one tie that the law respects more than money. It is marriage. I am not asking for your love. I am asking for a name. If you will agree before God and before Reverend Holloway and before such witnesses as we can muster to be the wife of Silas Wendell Hartwick, then no man on this earth can drag you off this mountain without first going through me, and going through me will not be cheap." He paused. "You will sleep in your own bed. You will keep your own key. The bargain we struck the morning after you came is the bargain that will hold. Nothing will change in this house unless you of your own will ask for it to change. The marriage will protect you. The marriage will ask nothing of you. That is my word. A Hartwick man keeps his word." She looked at him. She looked at the candle. She looked at her own hand lying on the table beside the torn page. "Silas Hartwick," she said, "you have already given me more than any man has ever given me. You are giving me your name now to keep me alive. I will say yes for that reason, but I will say it for another reason too, and I will say that reason out loud so you do not mistake it." She lifted her chin. "I am saying yes because I want to." His hands on the table closed slowly into fists and then opened again, and then he reached very carefully and took her right hand in both of his, and he held it and he did not speak because there were no words for the thing he was feeling. She understood that. She let him hold her hand. She closed her own fingers around his. 3 days later, Reverend Augustus Holloway, 66 years old and stiff with rheumatism, came up the mountain in a borrowed cutter with his Methodist book in a leather satchel. Sheriff Stanton and Lavinia came as witnesses. Walter Burnside came riding gingerly with a brand new shirt under his coat. Mrs. Hadley came with a basket of biscuits she had baked at 4 a.m. so they would still be warm at the ceremony. Eli, the boy who had brought the news of the brindle bull, came too because he had asked to come and because no one had the heart to say no. They stood in the yard of Silver Ridge in the snow in the pale December sun. Della wore her crimson traveling dress, the same dress she had stepped down out of the stage and brushed clean and pressed by her own hand. Silas wore his father's black wool waistcoat over a white shirt that had been his wedding shirt 15 years before. Ezra stood at his brother's right shoulder. Sheriff Stanton stood at Della's left. Reverend Holloway stood between them with his book open and his old voice strong. When the question came, Silas looked at Della across the open page, and his storm-gray eyes were wet, and he said in a voice that did not waver, "I do, so help me God. A Hartwick man keeps his word." When the question came to Della, she did not look away from him. "I do," she said. Silas leaned in and kissed her once on the forehead. It was a kiss with no hurry in it. It was the kiss a man gives a woman he has decided to spend a lifetime not deserving of. Mrs. Hadley wept openly. Walter Burnside took off his hat and held it over his heart, the way men of his generation did when they meant a thing. That night when the company had gone, Silas walked Della to the door of the back bedroom. He stood in the hallway. He did not move to come in. "Della Hartwick," he said. The name was new in his mouth. He tasted it. He smiled the smallest, slowest smile, a smile that had been 15 years on the way. "Sleep well. The house is yours. The bargain stands." "Silas," she said. "Yes. Come in, just to sit, just for a while." He came in. He sat in the rocking chair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed. They talked low about nothing important, about the way the snow had lifted at the end of the ceremony, about Eli's grin, about the way Walter had wept. They talked until the lamp burned low, and then when the lamp went out, he stood, and he crossed the room, and he leaned down and kissed her once on the mouth, soft and unhurried, the way a man kisses a vow, and he said good night, and he went out, and he closed the door behind him. Outside, the snow had begun again, soft and slow, and the door closed against the wind, and what lay on the other side of that door belongs to Della Hartwick alone. The peace lasted 4 weeks. It broke on the night of December 24th, 1884, 3 hours before midnight at the worst hour of the worst storm of the worst winter that anyone in the Bitterroot country could remember. Della was the first to hear it. She had risen from the bed where she had been sitting up reading a Christmas gift from Ezra, a battered copy of Bleak House. She had heard beneath the wind the wrong sound, the sound of a horse, not their own, the sound of a boot on the woodshed roof, the sound of a man trying to be quiet and failing. She woke Silas with a hand on his shoulder and a single word, "Riders." He was up and reaching for the Henry before the word was finished. Ezra was up a heartbeat later, the shotgun already in his hands, his shirt only half buttoned. Silas caught Della's wrist as she moved toward the parlor. "The Colt," he said. "6 chambers, not the 7th, the corner of the kitchen by the stove. Do not come out unless you hear me say your name." "Silas, I love you, Della Hartwick." He said it fast low, as a man says a thing he is afraid he will not have another chance to say. "I should have said it on the porch the first night. Stay alive. We will speak of it after." He kissed her hard and quick on the mouth. Then he was gone up the ladder to the loft, with the Henry in his hand, and Ezra was at the back door with the shotgun, and somewhere out in the storm, in the dark, in the white, 4 men with hard faces and Eastern coats and the patience of paid killers were closing in around the cabin at Silver Ridge. Della took the Colt from the kitchen drawer. She loaded 6 chambers and left the 7th empty the way Silas had taught her. She set herself in the corner by the stove. She did not feel afraid. She felt instead that strange, clean cold she had felt only twice before in her life, the night Thaddeus had come into her room in Chicago, and the morning she had stepped off the stage at Silver Ridge. The first rifle shot came from the loft. Outside in the dark, a man cried out. The night had begun. The first rifle shot from the loft was answered before its echo had cleared the timber. Glass shattered on the parlor side. A bullet buried itself in the door frame 3 inches above Ezra's head. Ezra did not flinch. He swung the shotgun across the back door, caught a shadow moving along the woodshed wall, and let go a single barrel that lit up the dooryard for one white instant. The shadow went down and did not get up. Della pressed her back against the cold iron of the stove and held the Colt in both hands, the way Silas had shown her, low-level breathing, slow. From the loft above her, she heard the dry, clean work of the Henry the lever, the breath, the lever, the breath. Silas was firing the way a man fires when he has counted the chambers in his enemy's gun and the chambers in his own, and means to come out of the count alive. A man jumped down from the woodshed roof onto the porch. Della saw the boot first, then the shoulder, then the rifle barrel coming around the corner of the kitchen window. She did not think. She pulled the trigger of the Colt. The kick went all the way up into her shoulder. The man on the porch made a sound that was not a word and fell sideways out of her line of sight. She did not know if she had killed him. She did not in that moment care. It was over faster than she would have believed. 6 minutes, maybe 7. The Henry barked twice more from the loft and then went quiet. The shotgun barked once more from the back. Then there was only the wind and the crack of a stovepipe somewhere settling and a single horse out beyond the timber line going hard down the trail toward redemption, with the last of the riders riding low across its neck. Silas came down the ladder. He did not come down fast. He came down the way a man comes down when he is checking each rung because he is not entirely sure anymore that his legs will hold him. He stepped into the kitchen. His shirt was dark down the right side, and the dark was spreading. "Silas," Della said. "It is nothing." He set the Henry on the table. He looked toward the back door. "Ezra." There was no answer. "Ezra." Della was already moving. She ran past Silas with the Colt still in her hand. The back door stood open into the snow and the wind. Ezra was on his knees in the dooryard, with one hand pressed flat to his right shoulder and the other still on the stock of the shotgun. The snow under him was red. "Brother," Ezra said when he saw them, and he tried to smile, and the smile slipped sideways. "I am all right. I am only sitting down a moment." He fell forward into Silas's arms. The night that followed was the longest Della had known since the night Nathaniel died. They got Ezra inside. They laid him on the kitchen table because the parlor was too far and the bedrooms were too far, and Silas tore his brother's shirt down the front, and Della saw the wound, a clean hole in the meat above the collarbone, the kind of wound that would not kill a man if a man could be kept warm and clean and quiet, the kind of wound that would absolutely kill a man if it could not. The bullet had gone through. There was no slug to dig out. There was only the slow, steady seep of blood that she could not seem to stop, and the slow, steady drop of Ezra's color, and the slow, steady rise of fear in her own chest that she could not let into her hands. She remembered with a clarity that surprised her the sewing kit Mrs. Quincy had pressed into her bag the morning she had left Chicago. Strong thread, curved needles. Beatrice Quincy had been a nurse in Pennsylvania during the war between the states. Beatrice Quincy had said, "Adelaide, a woman never knows when she will need to mend a man instead of a sleeve." Della had laughed at the time. She was not laughing now. She boiled water. She washed her hands. She washed the wound. She threaded the needle. She did not let her fingers shake. She set the first stitch, and Ezra cried out, and Silas, who was holding his brother's good shoulder down against the table, did not lift his eyes from his brother's face. She set the second stitch. She set the third. She set 14 stitches in all, working slow, working clean, the way Beatrice Quincy had once described it, across a kitchen table in Chicago, and she did not stop until the bleeding had stopped, and then she dressed the wound with a poultice of bread and milk because Mrs. Hadley had once told her that was what frontier women had used in the long bad winters when there was nothing else, and she bound it in clean linen, and she sat down at last on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and her hands red to the wrists, and she put her face against her own knees, and she cried for the first time, the kind of crying she had been saving for 15 months. Silas knelt beside her. He did not touch her. He waited. When she could speak, she said, "Your shoulder." He looked down at his own right side as if he had forgotten about it. "It is nothing. It is a graze. The ribs caught it. Let me see. Della, let me see Silas Hartwick." He let her see. It was a graze, as he had said. The bullet had taken a strip of skin and meat along the lower ribs and gone on into the wall behind the loft ladder. She washed it. She bound it. She did not stitch it because it did not need stitching. Her hands by the end were entirely steady, which surprised her and did not surprise him. By dawn, the storm was beginning to thin. Ezra was breathing slow and even on the kitchen table under 3 quilts. Silas was at the window with the Henry across his arm, watching the trail. Della was at the stove making coffee, because there was nothing else her hands could think to do. Silas turned from the window. "He needs Dr. Whitlock," he said. "He has lost too much blood. The wound will fever by tonight. I have seen it before. Without the medicine that comes in those black bags out of Helena, my brother will not see Christmas Day." 40 miles, Della said. 40 miles in the storm. The storm is breaking. By noon, I can be on the trail. By tomorrow sundown, I can be back. Silas. Della, listen to me. He set the rifle down. He took her face between his bandaged hands. "I have buried 3 women I loved. I will not bury my brother. I will not. The mountain does not care, but I do. Winter always ends, Della. This one will end too. I am coming back to see it end with you." He kissed her forehead fast hard. Keep him warm, keep him drinking, spoon broth into him every hour, whether he wants it or not. Do not let strangers through that door. Sheriff Stanton knows, Walter knows, they will come. Trust them, trust no one else. The Henry stays here, the Colt stays loaded. I will be back. A Hartwick man keeps his word. Silas, say it. A Hartwick man keeps his word. Say my name, Silas. I love you, Della Hartwick. I love you. Come back to me. He went. She stood on the porch and watched Whisper's gray rump disappear into the white timber, and she did not let the lantern shake, and she did not lower it until she could not see him any longer, and then she turned and went back inside to a brother-in-law who was at that moment the only family she had under the roof. 36 hours. She would remember it later as one long hour with no edges, Ezra's fever climbing, Ezra calling out in his sleep for Mary Sutton, for his mother Prudence, whom he had not seen since he was 14, for his father for once, Della herself. Della spoon-feeding him broth at midnight, Della changing the bandage at 3, Della praying at 5, in words she had not used in a long time on her knees beside the kitchen table where her brother-in-law lay burning. Della at the window at the long blue dawn of the second day, her forehead pressed to the cold glass, whispering Silas, 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 the way some women say the rosary. It was just past 10 on the morning of the 26th that she heard the sound. She was at the stove. She thought at first that she was imagining it. The sound was wrong. It was not a horse. It was not a clean, strong horse. It was a stagger, a hoof catching the porch step, a heavy fall. She ran. He was on the porch boards. Whisper stood over him with her head down and her sides heaving and ice in her mane. Silas's hat was gone. His coat was white with frozen sweat. His lips were blue. His eyes were closed. But his right hand, his bandaged right hand, was clenched around a small leather case the size of a Bible, and the case had a brass plate on it with the name Cornelius Whitlock Helena. She got him inside. She got him dry. She got him warm. She thawed his hands one finger at a time, the way old Zeke Hawthorne had once told her his trapper father used to thaw a frostbitten man, slow, slow in water, no warmer than the inside of a wrist. She cried while she did it, and she did not stop crying, and she did not let go of his hand. She broke open the leather case. Inside it, she found 3 glass bottles of clear liquid, 3 brass syringes wrapped in oiled cloth, and a folded letter in a doctor's careful hand that began, Mrs. Hartwick, your husband would not stop until I gave him these, and which ended, inject the second bottle every 6 hours into the muscle of his brother's good arm. God keep you all. She did what the letter told her to do. She did it for 2 more days. Ezra's fever broke at sundown on the 28th. Silas sat up on the morning of the 29th and asked in a voice like dry grass for coffee. She brought him coffee. She sat on the edge of the bed. She did not let go of his hand. He did not let go of hers. Della, he said. Yes. I told you I loved you on the porch the night the riders came. You did. I want to say it again now in the daylight when I am not bleeding and not riding out. So you will know I meant it both times. I know. I love you. I know, Silas. I love you too. He closed his eyes. He smiled very small. He went back to sleep with her hand in his. 3 weeks passed. Ezra mended. Silas mended. The new year came in cold and clear. On the 2nd of January, 1885, Sheriff Stanton rode up the mountain with a hard look in his eye and a sealed envelope from the federal court in Helena. Adelaide Thornberry Hartwick was named in 3 counts: the theft of $200 from one Beatrice Quincy of Chicago, the fraudulent contraction of marriage to one Silas Wendell Hartwick of Silver Ridge, and for Silas conjoined to her case the unlawful killing of 2 persons unknown, on the night of December 24th last. Trial was set for the first week of March in Helena. The plaintiff and complaining witness was named on the second page, Thaddeus Ashford Pemberton, Esquire of Chicago. Silas read the writ twice. He set it down on the kitchen table. He laid his hand over Della's. "He has come at us with the law," he said. "We will go at him with the truth." "He has more money than the truth," she said. "The truth," said Silas, "has a way of bringing money to its knees when the truth is brought into a room by enough good people. We will need good people. I know where to find them." He went to see old Zeke Hawthorne that week alone on Whisper up into the high timber where the old trapper kept his cabin among the bristlecones. Old Zeke was 78 years old, a Union cavalryman in his youth, a friend of Obadiah Hartwick from the years when both men were young. He had a beard like a snowdrift and eyes the color of iron, and when Silas told him what was happening, old Zeke went into the back of his cabin and brought out a battered tin trunk that Obadiah Hartwick had asked him to keep sealed until Silas himself came asking for it. Inside the trunk were papers. There were a great many papers. There was a letter in Obadiah's hand that began, "Son, if you are reading this, you have found that there is a wolf at your gate." There was a sworn affidavit from a Pinkerton operative out of Boston named Mr. Alistair Penrose, dated late August of 1884, just weeks before Obadiah's death. There was a yellowed clipping from a Massachusetts paper of 1878 describing the disappearance of $50,000 from a Boston banking house and the flight of the senior clerk 1, Theodore Ashby, age 22, height 6 feet, dark hair, a habit of changing names. There was a list of women, 4 women from 4 different states who had all in their turn been employed in boarding houses owned by a man calling himself Thaddeus Ashford Pemberton, 2 of whom had died young and unmarried and under circumstances the Pinkerton operative described as worthy of further inquiry. There was a separate sheet, a single page in another woman's hand, signed Ophelia Ashford, Pemberton, Boston, dated August 1884, the wife of the man in question, an invalid woman, writing from her sick bed, who stated under her own signature that her husband had pursued and harassed 3 different women in her own employ, that she believed him to be dangerous, and that she wished, in the event of her death, for her testimony to stand. Silas read it all. He did not weep. He did not strike the table. He set each paper back into the trunk in the order he had taken it out. He looked across the cabin at old Zeke, who was sitting by his iron stove with his hands folded on his lap. "Pa knew," Silas said. "Pa suspected," said old Zeke. "Pa wrote to Boston the week he learned the agency had matched Adelaide Thornbury to your name. Pa was a careful man. He paid the Pinkertons out of his own pocket. He was not going to send a young woman up this mountain to my best friend's son without knowing who else might come up the mountain after her. He did not tell me. He did not have time, Silas. The cancer took him faster at the end than any of us expected. He told me to keep this trunk. He told me when the wolf came to give it to you." Silas stood up. He picked up the trunk. "Old man," he said, "I owe you. I do not know yet for how much, but I owe you." "You owe me nothing," said old Zeke. "You owe your father. Pay him by livings." The trial was set for the 3rd of March. They had 8 weeks to prepare. Silas rode to Helena and engaged Mrs. Henrietta Marlowe Sinclair, the first woman admitted to the bar in Montana Territory, a small woman of 45 with iron hair and the bearing of a battlefield general. She read the Pinkerton papers in 2 hours flat in her office in the courthouse square, and at the end of the 2nd hour, she looked up at Silas and said, "Mr. Hartwick, I have been waiting 20 years for a case like this. I will see your wife walk out of that courtroom a free woman, and I will see the man who came after her walk out in irons. I require $50 retainer and your full honesty. The rest can wait until we win." Silas paid the $50. Mrs. Marlowe Sinclair shook his hand the way a man shakes hands. The night they came back from Helena, there was a fire. They smelled it before they saw it, black smoke rolling up out of the timber on the downside of Silver Ridge Ranch. It was the Long Horse Barn. The riders had come back. They had not waited for the trial. They had come at midnight with kerosene and a torch, 4 men this time, and they had set the barn ablaze and run for the trail. By the time Silas Della and Ezra rode in, half the roof was gone, and Whisper, Beautiful Whisper, was screaming in her stall. They got the horses out, all of them. Silas went into the burning barn 3 times. The 3rd time he came out with Whisper at the end of a length of rope. Her mane singed her flank, scorched along the right hip, but alive and standing. He put his face against her neck for a long moment, and Della, watching from the well where she had been hauling buckets with Ezra, felt her own heart do a thing it had not done since the night the riders had come at Christmas. Sheriff Stanton arrived at sunrise. He looked at the barn. He looked at the kerosene tin. One of the riders had dropped at the edge of the timber. He looked at the boot prints in the snow leading to where 4 horses had stood. He took off his hat. He spat once into the snow. "Mr. Hartwick," he said, "Mrs. Hartwick, I have been a sheriff in this county for 15 years. There has been one man in my town all winter spending money like water and asking after one of my neighbors. I have not had cause to hold him. I have cause now. I am going to be in court in Helena in March. I am going to be on your side of the aisle. You can put that in writing if you want. I will sign it." Mrs. Marlowe Sinclair, when she heard, smiled like a woman who has just heard a door open in a hallway she had thought walled up. "Mr. Hartwick," she said by telegram from Helena, "bring the sheriff, bring the kerosene tin, bring the boot prints if you can cast them. We are going to win." In the 2nd week of February, Beatrice Quincy of Chicago, 65 years old, a Methodist widow, with a hand that shook now from rheumatism but not from fear, boarded a westbound train on her own savings. She came over the plains with a leather satchel chained to her wrist that contained, among other things, a notarized statement from a Chicago bank teller who had handled the deposits from Beatrice's own account, a sworn affidavit from her cook and her 2 surviving boarders, and the letter Ophelia Ashford, Pemberton, had written from her sick bed in Boston, sent care of Beatrice for safekeeping the previous summer. She arrived in Helena on the 27th of February, 3 days before the trial. Mrs. Marlowe Sinclair met her at the station. Beatrice Quincy looked Mrs. Marlowe Sinclair up and down and said, "Madam, I have come a great distance. Please tell me that the man I have come to bury in court is still in town." He was. He was sitting in the best suite at the Helena House Hotel. He was about to learn a new thing about the West. The trial of Adelaide Thornberry, Hartwick and Silas Wendell Hartwick, before Judge Phineas Crawford of the Federal Court of the Territory of Montana, opened on the morning of the 3rd of March, 1885. The courtroom was packed. The prosecution sat behind 3 lawyers in Eastern broadcloth. Thaddeus Ashford Pemberton, who that morning was still using that name, sat at the prosecution table in a coat with velvet at the cuffs and the smile of a man who had purchased every advantage he believed could be purchased. The defense sat behind Mrs. Henrietta Marlowe Sinclair. Della was beside her in her crimson traveling dress, brushed and pressed by Lavinia Stanton's own hand. Silas was on Della's other side. Ezra sat in the gallery directly behind. Sheriff Stanton sat on the 2nd row with his hat on his knee, Walter Burnside and Mrs. Hadley sat behind the sheriff. Beatrice Quincy of Chicago sat with her satchel still chained to her wrist. Reverend Holloway, who had come down from redemption out of friendship and would not be moved, sat beside her. The prosecution went first. They were good. They were Eastern good. They laid out the theft. They laid out the marriage, calling it sham, calling it desperate, calling it a fraud upon the law of the territory. They laid out the killings on Christmas Eve, which they called murder and which they implied were the act of a violent man with a violent past. They produced a forged letter said to have been written by Della herself to Thaddeus the year before, full of endearments. They produced 2 paid witnesses out of Chicago men who would not look at Beatrice Quincy when she fixed them across the courtroom with her quiet, terrible old eyes. The prosecution rested at the end of the first day. Thaddeus, at the table, was already smiling. The defense opened on the morning of the second day. Mrs. Marlowe Sinclair stood up. She was small. Her voice was not. She called Beatrice Quincy first. Beatrice told the truth in plain Chicago English. She told the courtroom that she had given Adelaide Thornberry $200 from her own savings in cash, in her own kitchen, on the night of the 8th of August, 1884, in the presence of her cook, who had signed an affidavit to that effect, currently in the satchel chained to Beatrice's wrist. She told the courtroom that she had begged Adelaide to take the money and run, because the man who owned the boarding house, the man at the prosecution table, had been pursuing her for 2 years against her will, had been seen entering her room at midnight on multiple occasions, and was in Beatrice's professional opinion a danger to any woman beneath his roof. Mrs. Marlowe Sinclair called the cook by deposition. She called the 2 surviving boarders by deposition. Each one corroborated Beatrice down to the dollar. Mrs. Marlowe Sinclair then produced the Pinkerton file. Judge Crawford on the bench leaned forward. By the end of the second day of the trial, the courtroom of the Federal Court of the Territory of Montana had heard in order the following: that the man at the prosecution table had been born Theodore Ashby in New York City in 1856, that he had embezzled $50,000 from a Boston banking house in 1878 and had fled under a forged identity as Thaddeus Ashford Pemberton, that he had operated boarding houses in Boston, Albany, Cleveland, and Chicago, and that in each of these establishments at least one young woman had reported, before her death or her disappearance, conduct toward her by the proprietor that she described in her own hand as menacing, that his lawful wife in Boston, Ophelia Ashford Pemberton, had written from her sick bed before her death the previous autumn, attesting in her own signature to the same, that the forged letter introduced by the prosecution that morning had been examined that afternoon by a handwriting expert from the Territorial Post Office, who had testified on oath that it was not in Adelaide Thornberry's hand. There was, as Mrs. Marlowe Sinclair brought to the court's attention on the morning of the third day, one further matter, the matter of Mr. Nathaniel Thornberry, deceased. Mrs. Marlowe Sinclair called Mr. Jasper Whitcomb of Chicago. Mr. Whitcomb had been arrested by the Pinkertons in January 2 months earlier on a warrant for an unrelated forgery. Mr. Whitcomb, in exchange for a reduced sentence, had agreed to testify under oath as to a job he had been hired to do in November of 1883. The job had been, in Mr. Whitcomb's plain words, to loosen certain bolts on certain pieces of heavy machinery in a certain print shop on the west side of Chicago in such a way that the press would in due course fail. The man who had paid him for the job in cash had been the man currently sitting at the prosecution table. The reason given for the job had been in Mr. Whitcomb's recollection to make a young widow of a yellow-haired girl who lives upstairs. Della in the front row of the defense did not weep. Silas's hand closed over hers on the bench, and she gripped it hard, and she did not turn her face away from Thaddeus, who was no longer smiling, and who that afternoon was no longer using that name. The bailiff, on Judge Crawford's instruction, addressed him from that point on as Mr. Theodore Ashby. Judge Crawford handed down judgment on the morning of the 5th of March. All charges against Adelaide Thornberry Hartwick were dismissed. The marriage of Silas Wendell Hartwick and Adelaide Thornberry Hartwick was held to be lawful, valid, and permanent. The killings on Christmas Eve at Silver Ridge Ranch were ruled lawful self-defense in the protection of a household, and Theodore Ashby, alias Thaddeus Ashford Pemberton, was remanded into federal custody on charges of embezzlement, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit arson, conspiracy to commit murder for hire, and conspiracy to commit homicide in the death of Nathaniel Thornberry of Chicago. He was bound over for trial in Boston, where his sentence, when it came that summer, would be the long drop at the end of a short rope. He shouted, as the bailiffs took him out, that Della belonged to him, that she had always belonged to him, that she would not be free of him. She stood up in her place. She did not raise her voice. "My name," she said, "is Adelaide Hartwick. I have never belonged to any man. I belong to the ridge and to the cabin, and to the husband and to the brother who waited up nights with me. Goodbye, Mr. Ashby." He was led out. The courtroom rose. Beatrice Quincy, sitting at last, allowed herself to weep. Sheriff Stanton put his hand on Walter Burnside's shoulder. Reverend Holloway closed his eyes and said very softly, "Amen." They went home to Silver Ridge. The spring of 1885 came sweet and slow. The snow went, the high creeks ran loud, the cattle calved in the lower pasture, and Silas counted 47 new head, and only one loss, which Walter Burnside said was the best calving rate any of them had seen in 5 years. Della knelt at the foot of the pine tree at the edge of the yard and laid a sprig of bitterroot on the small grave there, and she sat with Cordelia Hartwick a while, and she said in her own quiet way what she needed to say, which was that she would not try to take Cordelia's place, and that she was grateful, and that she would care for the man Cordelia had loved. Silas found her there. He knelt beside her in the grass. He did not speak. He took her hand. They sat together at the grave for a long time. In May of 1885, Della told Silas on the porch in the evening that they would have a child by Christmas. He sat down on the porch step and put his hands over his face for the second time in his life, and the second time was not so terrible to her as the first, because this time she knew the tears were the other kind. In December of that year, Tabitha Cordelia Hartwick was born in the back bedroom at Silver Ridge Ranch, with Mrs. Hadley at the head of the bed, and Lavinia Stanton at the foot of it, and Silas Hartwick walking the hallway outside until Mrs. Hadley opened the door and put his daughter into his arms. He looked down at the small new face. He did not move for a long time. In 1886, Ezra married Constance Stanton, the sheriff's niece, who had come up the mountain with her aunt the previous Christmas and had not stopped looking at Ezra during supper. They built a cabin a quarter-mile down the ridge. Della stood up at their wedding in a dress of deep blue wool, and Constance Stanton, when the vows were done, walked straight to Della and said "sister," and the word was a gift Della had not been expecting and did not know what to do with except to put her arms around her new sister and hold on. The years came, the years went. Obadiah Nathaniel Hartwick was born in 1888, named for the grandfather he would never know, and for the first husband his mother would never forget. Prudence Lavinia Hartwick was born in 1892, named for the grandmother under the pine tree and for the woman who had midwifed her. Ezra published a book in 1895 and another in 97, and another in 99. Walter Burnside died on a Tuesday in 1898, 70 years old, and Silas dug the grave with his own hands and lowered the casket with his own ropes. Dr. Whitlock died in 1903, Sheriff Stanton in 1910, Reverend Holloway, against everyone's expectations, including his own, lived to be 93 and preached his last sermon in 1911, leaning on the pulpit at the Little Methodist Church in Redemption, with Della in the front row holding his hand at the closing hymn. In 1905, Tabitha Cordelia Hartwick married Dr. Beaumont Burnside, who was Walter's grandson and who had taken over the medical practice in Redemption from old Whitlock. In 1906, Emmeline Burnside was born, and the year after Theodora. In 1908, Obadiah married a girl from Helena and brought home a son named Silas Hartwick, the second after his grandfather, and Silas the elder held the boy in his arms on the porch and said, "Only brother." He was speaking to Ezra, who stood beside him, and Ezra heard everything that was meant. The legacy passage of this story is short because the long good years of a long good marriage are difficult to tell as a story. They are only difficult to live through, and then easy to remember, and then sweet to outlive. There were hard winters. There was a season of drought. There was a fire in the hayloft in 1890 contained by the family alone. There was the year the cattle market broke and the year it came back. There was a daughter who set out to teach in a one-room schoolhouse 2 valleys over, and who came home to the surprise of nobody but herself, married to a Lutheran rancher with a quiet smile. There were grandchildren in the kitchen at every harvest, and there was Ezra, gray now at the temple, sitting on the porch with his brother on summer evenings and not saying very much, because between Hartwick brothers, very much had not been needed for a long time. On a cold afternoon in September of 1914, 30 years to the day from the day she had stepped down from the stagecoach, Adelaide Hartwick walked out onto the porch of the cabin at Silver Ridge with a wool shawl around her shoulders and a cup of coffee in her hands. Her hair was silver white now, with the last of the honey blonde holding only at the temples. Her cornflower blue eyes were the same. She was 54 years old. Her hands had begun to know their age. Her heart did not. Silas was already in his chair at the porch rail, smoking a clay pipe. He was 62. His chestnut hair had gone the color of old steel, and the scar through his left eyebrow showed bone white in the fall light. He turned when he heard the door, and the smile that came over his face was the smile that had taken him 15 years to remember how to do, and which had never since the first evening he had remembered it gone away. "Mrs. Hartwick," he said. "Mr. Hartwick," she said. She sat down beside him. Down in the yard between the porch and the pine tree at the edge of the grass, 3 small children were chasing each other through the late wildflowers. 8-year-old Emmeline Burnside, 6-year-old Silas Hartwick, the second, and 4-year-old Lily Hartwick, who was Obadiah's youngest, and who could not yet pronounce her own surname. Beyond them by the corral, Ezra and Constance were walking arm in arm. Ezra, with his pipe in his hand, Constance with her hair coming loose in the wind. The first snow of the year had begun, slow flakes large as coins drifting down out of a sky the color of pewter. "Do you remember," Silas said, "the day you came up this mountain? Like it was an hour ago. You were wearing that red dress. You pointed a rifle at me." "I never pointed it. I carried it." "Silas Hartwick, you absolutely pointed it. I was there. I remember." He laughed the soft, slow laugh of an old man with nothing left to be afraid of. "Della," he said. "Yes. This is where you belong." "Yes," she said. "I know. This is where I belong too." "Yes. A Hartwick man keeps his word." "Yes. Winter always ends." She set her hand on his. The flakes came down. Down in the yard, the children screamed and chased each other in great looping circles, the way grandchildren do when the cold first comes and the world feels very large to them. The pine tree at the edge of the grass beneath which Cordelia and Tabitha and Prudence had slept these 45 years held its boughs out to the falling snow. The barn that had been burned in 1885 and rebuilt in 1886 stood square and red against the white pasture. The lamp in the kitchen window had been lit by Constance an hour ago and threw its warm gold square onto the porch boards. Far away, an eagle turned once over the high ridge and was gone. Adelaide Hartwick, who had been Adelaide Thornberry, who had been Della all her life to the people who loved her, looked out at all of it. She looked at the husband at her side. She looked at her brother-in-law and sister-in-law walking by the corral. She looked at her grandchildren. She looked at the snow. "I still remember," she said, "stepping down off that stagecoach into nothing at all, 30 years ago today, and here I am on the porch of a house you built with your own hands, with our grandchildren in the yard, with the snow coming down. I think that was the day my life began. I have thought so for 30 years. I will think so until the end." Silas Hartwick lifted her hand and kissed it, the way he had kissed it in front of Reverend Augustus Holloway at her wedding in 1884, the way a man kisses a vow that has already been kept. "We built this," he said, "with our own hands." "Yes," she said, "we did." The snow came down on Silver Ridge. The lamp in the kitchen window held its small, steady light. Down in the yard, 3 small children chased each other through the last of the wildflowers, and they were laughing, and the laughing carried a long way in the cold, clean air, and somewhere in the timber a single jay called once, and was answered again. That was the end of the long road home. That was the country at the top of the mountain. That was what they had built with their own hands in the years between the day a stagecoach door swung open in the snow and the day the snow began again, and a man and a woman who had each thought their lives over sat together on a porch and watched their grandchildren run. You have stayed with this story to the end, partner, and I am grateful. Walk easy tonight. Keep your promises. Hold your people close. And remember what Silas Hartwick told his Della on the night the riders came, and on the day the trial ended, and on every cold porch evening of 30 years afterward. The mountain does not care, but somebody does. There is always somebody who does. May you find that somebody if you have not already. May you keep that somebody if you have, and may your winters, every one of them, end in spring.